Fluttershy's melodic humming filled the little cottage on the outskirts of Ponyville. The evidence of little muddy footprints and collected dust needed to be cleaned, and Fluttershy could think of no better way to do it than throughout a song. Chipmunks, mice, squirrels, and raccoons wove in and out of her hooves as little white birds hovered over the head, bobbing and weaving to keep time. Fluttershy's tune then came to an abrupt stop when she heard a soft knock. It surprised her a little to be interrupted, but she shook her head and smiled as she tried to answer the door. "Hello?" she gleefully asked, her face reflecting on her rare excitement of the prospect of visitors. However, that joy was stilled when a lump formed in her throat at the sight of the pony swaying on her doorstep. Applejack, one of Fluttershy's nearest and dearest friends, offered her a weak smile, but it did to little mask the horrors Fluttershy was seeing. The once proud and strong earth pony looked as if a breath of breeze would topple over her. Her hooves then shook in place as if she stood before her Pegasus friend, making it difficult for her to stand. Her orange coat, that one of strong resemblance to the fruit of its namesake, it paled to her to match the delicate petals on the faded rose. Applejack shuddered with each breath, heavy and labored like Fluttershy would after a long day of apple bucking in the hot sun of the summer. Finally, the bread beads of sweat littered AJ's brow, and numbers that revivaled, and freckles in her pale cheek. Applejack looked horrendously ill. "For Fluttershy, I'm so sorry I didn't come sooner when I heard," she started, but Fluttershy's compassionate instincts took over her before her friend could finish her thought. Fluttershy fanned at her wings and flew around the mare before looking at her front hooves under Applejack's. AJ reared up as Fluttershy involuntarily ushered her inside and straight to the old green couch near the door. "Applejack, you look just awful. What on earth were you doing out of bed?" Fluttershy scolded. "Nonsense. I heard about Angel Bunny and I wanted to be there to show my support." Applejack wheezed, her breath refusing to catch up with her. "Does Granny Smith know you're here? Or Big Mac?" Fluttershy asked, but she didn't yet make eye contact or slow her pace as she spoke. Fluttershy flitted out of the cottage and had made a mad dash of effort to make her friend more comfortable. Before AJ could protest, stacks of pillows, blankets, and a cold compress were carefully arranged on and around the mare. Fluttershy was a pony on a mission, and she wouldn't be satisfied until her efforts were there to help her friend were completely exhausted. "I don't need a babysitter," Applejack grumbled, as she fidgeted with the blanket that Fluttershy had swaddled too tightly into the mare's side. Fluttershy ignored her friend's protest, and then she turned to the next help of her animal friends, who worried more at her reaction to Applejack than for Applejack herself. However, helping Fluttershy was a joy of her animals, and many of them did not need to be told what to do. For years they watched Fluttershy care for alien creatures, and most often there was a structure to her care. The two squirrels carried a wet towel to Applejack's forehead, laying it softly across her temples. Some birds bruised themselves, retucking the blankets into place. When Applejack would try and wriggle free from their grasp, Harry the bear gingerly poured some medicine into a wooden spoon, held it out to the mare with an expectant expression on his face. Applejack, unnerved, just chuckled and shook her head. "No thanks, I'm good." "Good? You look more furious thing from good," Fluttershy called when she re-entered the room. Her hooves were even more full of pillows, and Applejack couldn't help but wonder, where on earth was she going to stick them? AJ already felt the wrapped up tighter than a caterpillar in its cocoon. "You didn't need to come over here so you could fuss over me, Fluttershy. I'm fine, really," Applejack protested, as Fluttershy managed to find a new crevices for these additional pillows to prop up her friend. "It's no bother, if anything. Helping you would take my mind off of... Fluttershy's voice cracked. It was the first time lingering through thought in the back of her head that had pushed itself into the forefront of her mind. Applejack's face melted down in annoyance to sympathy. She reasoned that her friend was going a little overboard with her pampering, to try and keep the sorrow at bay, if how Applejack could help her. She would endure this treatment to a point. "Fluttershy," Applejack whispered. She rustled a hoof free, reached out to rub her friend's back. Sorry. What happened? How did he? Well, you know." Fluttershy wiped the tears from her eyes as she sucked in the next sob to answer. She braved a small smile. "It's called snuffles. It's a disease that's contracted primarily by rabbits and bunnies. And it's an infection and, well, it's really difficult to cure. But I'm just grateful the other bunnies aren't showing any symptoms. I'm not sure how my heart could take it." Applejack was surprised by the momentarily in her friend's response, but chalked it off as grief. "Snuffles, huh? Sounds like too cute to be a deadly disease." Applejack tried to break the tension with a half laugh, and Fluttershy smiled slightly in response. "Yeah, I suppose it does," Fluttershy answered simply. She stood up and continued her previous task of straightening up the room. As she did so, she purposely kept her gaze from meeting Applejack's. "Thanks, well, Celestia, not all diseases are created equal. There is a pneumatic fever that is really whooping my flank. I'll show you. Wait for it soon." Applejack chuckled. "Pneumatic fever?" Fluttershy whirled around to face AJ, with concern written across her face. "How do you know it's—" "Just saw the doc yesterday and it said it's still in the early stages, so I'll have to keep my eye on it. I only remember the name because it's got Mac in it, and I'm told I'm just must have been the one to give it to me in the first place." Fluttershy could tell that her friend was greatly exaggerating her condition with a joke, but she knew that Applejack was as stubborn as they come. AJ wouldn't have gone to see the doctor unless home remedies had failed her. It was beyond this point of rest and liquids. No, Fluttershy knew it must be serious. "You walked all the way to my cottage for a pneumatic fever?" Fluttershy gasped. It's all right. It's not contagious or anything. Not since the dog gave me a shot, and I never get my friends sick," Applejack said, panicked that Fluttershy believed that she was being careless. I know, Shedbay, resting, but Rainbow told me that Angel passed and, well, the rest of them got to comfort you. So it was my turn, cause darn it." Fluttershy didn't even wince at the mention of her beloved pet's name or his passing. Her thoughts were focused on now Applejack, and no, it wasn't a favorable distraction. It was a distraction nevertheless. Fluttershy looked in the direction of her bedroom and recalled a book that she had borrowed from Twilight years past, and never returned it. It was a book on diseases and ailments, and most importantly cures. If there was even a chance she could help her friend, she would take it. "Will you excuse me for a moment, Applejack?" "Sure thing, Sugar Cube. I'll just rest up here, I guess," Applejack said, unable to do anything but succumb to her crushy prison on the couch. Fluttershy briskly trotted around to the bedroom, and her animal friends then all followed suit. They'd done their part and awaited for their orders with a bright hopeful in their eyes. Fluttershy closed the door softly before she scanned her small bookshelf and pulled out the book she had been seeking. Let's see, Potomac. She then spied the name on the table of contents and let out a sigh of relief. She feverishly flipped to the corresponding page number, and her animal friends crowded to see. Despite being unable to read Fluttershy's hope dimmed like a candle seeking oxygen, it felt as if though it would be snuffed out. The last two words on the page were read potentially deadly, but the other keywords like long-term suffering and difficult to cure echoed in her head. With rising volume, she read the passage again, biting back the rising terror, and then read the third time. She knew she was unconsciously doing so, to keep the reality at bay, because each piercing word left her less hope in its awake. Eventually, the flame kept being alivened by denial. It was extinguished. Fluttershy's facial expression changed to that of stern mother about a reprehended of her children. She closed her book, narrowly missing the tale of the curious chipmunk who had fallen on the page while trying to get a better view. "I need you to leave now, my little friends," Fluttershy said. Her tone was not as light as airy, but firm and fringing from the cross. The animals looked at one another in confusion, then back at her. "This wasn't a request. I don't want you to have to use my stair." The change in her overall demeanor tone was just enough to convince them that she meant business. The very mention of the dreaded stair sent them scattering around the room, towards the known exits. Harry the bear got himself stuck in her windowsill when trying to make his hasty exit. Fluttershy's sternness melted at the sight as she helped pull them free. The animals were too big for the window, though, and would need to go out the back door. Fluttershy opened her bedroom door next, and Applejack was greeted with a miniature stampede of animals to her exit. "Don't come back until I call you. Is that understood?" The animals didn't seem to acknowledge Fluttershy as they stamped her out the door and into the nearby trees. When Fluttershy turned back to Applejack, she saw the confused expression on her friend's face. What was that about?" Applejack asked. "I don't want them here for this discussion, Applejack." Fluttershy's answer simply. She locked the back door before she moved down to the windows. Applejack could only watch her sheer bewilderment as Fluttershy worked on to lock down their house, presumably from her animals. "What's the discussion? What's going on?" "I may not be a doctor, but I do know a thing or two about diseases, especially ones that affect my animal friends," Fluttershy answered flatly. "I told you that I ain't contagious, especially the critters, and I don't think they catch this sort of thing. The doc said it was a pony disease," Applejack hoarsely shouted with the string of coughs that followed. "Yes, I could see that. I found my entry about the potomatic disease in a book. Don't worry, I know they aren't in any danger." "Then what's this about?" Fluttershy finished to lock down the last window bolted. For the first time meeting since the Pegasus, Applejack felt uneasy. Fluttershy left the room momentarily without answering, and when she returned, Applejack noted the peculiar outfit she wore. Fluttershy was now in a long blue dress that draped loosely over her frame. She was devoid of frills or accentuating accessories, so she could already imagine Rarity's dismay. Applejack, however, apprehended this sympathy, and she had seen similar gowns in their style in little more rural areas of Equestria, including hometowns of distant Apple family members. A tight collar around the neck and chuffed sleeves reminded her of the older generation of apples. The dress was uninspired alone, but Fluttershy had paired it with some simple white apron that tied around her waist, completing the look. AJ also noticed a small white case carrying her under her wing. It took her a moment to understand why Fluttershy would wear such an ensemble, but she thought eventually dawned on her. She looked like a nurse. The case was a giveaway. Fluttershy approached and set it carefully on the ground. As she opened the latch to reveal a red cross on the side, confirming AJ's suspicions. "I don't think this is something first thing I could fix, Fluttershy, but I'm grateful you want to help me." Applejack inserted a laugh at the end of her words, trying to puncture the uncomfortable atmosphere that she had fallen and shrouded on the room. Fluttershy pulled up in a stool and sat beside her friend. She smiled down at her with a loving but worried gleam in her eye. "I'm afraid I'm the only one who can help you now, Applejack. Maybe it was a fate that you came today after all." Fluttershy finished her sentence by turning the case to show Applejack some of the contents. A series of large syringes ended in sharp needle points that were filled with unknown liquid. Applejack was hesitantly on edge. A quiver of fear shot up her spine. She rustled with the pillows and blankets in a frenzy to try and climb over the back of the couch to get away from them. "What in the hay are those for? And why in Equestria you got them?" she squeaked in horror. "Relax, Applejack. You act like I'm going to hurt you." Fluttershy giggled, for the first time since her friend's arrival. Although AJ was still tense, Fluttershy's giggle did calm her down, though, to stop her attempt to flee. Yeah, that's a funny joke, Fluttershy, so what are those anyway?" Fluttershy's movements were so fast and fluid that there was no chance for AJ to defend herself. In one swift motion, Fluttershy pierced one of the syringes from its place and held it aloft in her wing. Then she plunged it into Applejack's side. Applejack yelped in confusion and terror, and she leapt off the couch, causing an avalanche of pillows and blankets to fall on Fluttershy. It temporarily suffocated her while AJ headed for the door. AJ's breath ragged and panicked as her shaking hooves wrestled for the lock. Fluttershy flew free from the fluffy masses in the term pillows and landed near the door, but did nothing to stop the Earth Pony. Dr. Fauna gave them to me. They're sedatives to help me bring the animals to her clinic if they're being so rowdy. She then reached out a hoof to Applejack warningly. Don't resist it, Applejack. You'll only hurt yourself. Please relax. I don't want to hurt you. Fluttershy, why do you do that? Why? Applejack's speech slurred as her vision blurred. Her thoughts were desperate. They begged her limbs not to succumb to the numbness before she could get out the door. The glorious sound of the lock click gave her a temporary rush of adrenaline, but Applejack was pulled too quickly into darkness. She slumped onto the ground at Fluttershy's hooves as the Pegasus clicked, locked back into place. Applejack awoke with a jolt and a scream. She then felt something pressed firmly into her muzzle. The impulses reacted faster than her thoughts. She thrashed wildly on the soft bed, flung her hooves at the assailant, and while her brain caught up with itself, Fluttershy let out an eep of pain as she was thrown backwards onto the floor. She skidded to a stop and lost grip of the pillow in her hooves. It flew over her head and landed in the far corner of the room. Fluttershy, what in the hell are you doing? You could have killed me. Well, Fluttershy whispered meekly as she rubbed her wing with a wince. That was sort of the idea, Applejack. What? What do you mean, Fluttershy? What's going on? Are you a chrysalis in disguise? Applejack's thoughts were more frantic now when she got her bearings. She grasped at the explanations to that, though far-fetched, made it more sense than the obvious one panted on her best friend in an attempt to murder her. Oh, you must be terribly confused. This wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to feel anything? Sadness infused Fluttershy's voice as before the Pegasus' movements were fast and fluid. She then sprang from the floor, a syringe Applejack had seen, now grasped at her wing, and haphazardly plunged into AJ's flank. Applejack roared in pain and confusion. She smacked Fluttershy's hoof away from the syringe. Before she could finish emptying the liquid to her side, it was now hung awkwardly to the side of her flank, pulling the skin and muscle. AJ ignored the pain for a moment. Her priority was keeping Fluttershy away. She threw the blankets within reach of the bed, overtopped the mare while Fluttershy struggled to free herself. AJ squeezed her eyes shut and sucked in the pained gasp through the clenched teeth. She attempted to pull practically a full syringe free from her flesh, but the movement snapped the needle in process. The remaining liquid spilled onto the bed, a thin metal stub sticking out to her side, like a half-erected cross on a new grave. Oh dear, let me get that for you. Fluttershy leapt from the floor and wrestled Applejack down to try to pry the broken piece from her flank. AJ just wasn't used to seeing such strength and agility from some pony. She's only ever acting frail and delicate. AJ tried to put up a fight, but her hooves were already starting to feel heavy. Whatever sedative Fluttershy managed to plunge in her bloodstream was apparently taking hold already. Applejack's heart raced at the thought. To her horror, she realized that her sheer brute force wouldn't save her. She would have to convince her instead. For Fluttershy, just let me go and we'll forget that this ever happened, alright? I'm the element of honesty, so can't lie about that kind of thing, and I won't breathe a word. Keeping the tremor from her voice took more effort for her to attempt to move. Even so, AJ's hooves dragged sluggishly over the bed, like they had been filled with molasses. She was unaware that she already lost the sensation in them, so when they connected in awkwardly to the floor, they would be unable to bear the weight. Fluttershy's eyes widened in concern as she raced around the bed to catch Applejack before the invincible fall. Their bodies connected as Fluttershy struggled to hold them both upright. Be careful! I don't want you to hurt yourself! The audacity of Fluttershy's statement erased AJ's facade. "You're just trying to kill me, Fluttershy! How can you talk like that?" Fluttershy's ears dropped as she lowered her head. Although Applejack would be unable to see, it took some final lying, but Fluttershy was able to dump her friend in awkwardly into the back of the bed, her hooves laid out useless to her sides. Fluttershy soon after left AJ's line out of sight, and then sent a shiver of fear down the earth pony's spine. She grunted and rolled herself on the bed to face the mare who was rummaging through that cursed white case. "Oh, this is all going wrong. I knew I should have used more sedatives. You're a pony after all, not a rabbit." "What?" Applejack stammered, the realization finally hitting her. You've sedated was it Angel? Your own pet?" Fluttershy looked at her shamefaced. "I guess I'd explain that myself." "You think?" By Celestia's grace, Applejack watched in relief as the Pegasus moved away from the case without a new syringe and hoof. It was momentarily victory to the farm pony, so she would not let her pass by. She restrained back to life with her hooves, while Fluttershy explained, "Snuffles is a deadly disease, Applejack. Like yours, it's difficult to cure, and Rabbit would be suffering for months, even if they did eventually recover. The likelihood of anything happening was, well, not guaranteed. I couldn't see some creature I love suffer like that. I had to be strong. I had to be his angel. His little angel of mercy." "Mercy? As in mercy killing?" Applejack gasped, the urgency rising. She could hear the pounding of her heart in her head as she willed in the front of her hoof to move. It was hard to do. I cried for hours beforehand, but after his body stopped squirming under the pillow, it was all quiet and peaceful. After all, I spared him from so much pain and hardship, and he's in bunny heaven now, munching on all the carrots and radishes his little heart desires. It was right decision, Applejack. It gives me peace." "So you're gonna kill me because you think I'm gonna die, Fluttershy? The doctor said I was in early stages, that I should sleep it off, and take it easy. The most strenuous thing I did was come to you," Applejack shouted. A twinge of feeling ran through AJ's back, flanked like sympathy pins and needles. It was painful, but welcomed. "We both know you're too stubborn to stay in bed. You'd rather let things get worse before they get better. And then by then it'd be too late, Applejack. You were sent here by your fate because I'm supposed to help you. As your friend, I refuse to let you suffer." AJ's short-lived relief was nearing the end. Fluttershy was turned back towards the medical case and running her feathers over the different syringes, presumably looking for the right dosage. Applejack eardrums pounded at the beat of their heart rate. Shockwave after shockwave of pain irradiated from the hooves she desperately tried to revive. "I'm doing this because I love you, Applejack. You're one of my closest friends, dearest friends in the whole world. I'm going to miss you very much. I don't get a say in it? I don't get to decide whatever and I want to suffer through it?" Applejack screamed to try and buy more precious time. Tears of effort and pain and horror slid down her cheeks, but she knew better than to make a sound. "By the time you realize that you'd rather not suffer anymore, you'll be too sick to say it. All your loved ones will have to watch you waste away. Do you really want to put them through that? This has to happen, Applejack. It's the only way." Fluttershy turned, the apologetic expression on her face. The stark contrast of the syringe held us soft on her wing. AJ barely had time to react this terrifying size. She knew this was her moment and she had no choice but to give it all she had. "No, Fluttershy, it ain't!" Applejack rolled on her stomach, pressed her hooves to the bed. That pressure on her front hooves hurt more than a life-saving buck that she had propelled behind her. Her grunt effort turned into a scream of triumph when she felt her hooves make contact with the Pegasus. The force blow knocked the wind from Fluttershy and sent her reeling. Applejack knew that there would be a pain to follow, but she refused to cave into it. With grim determination, she rolled herself off the bed and landed on the other side. She focused on nothing but her front hooves as they shakily dragged her forward. The force of the buck left her back hooves temporarily useless, but they refused to let her slow that down. Her freedom inched closer. She could hear the soft sounds of whimpers and cries coming from the Pegasus, regaining their composure. Thinking fast, Applejack took note of Fluttershy's desk nearby. She pierced up on top of the lantern, presumably used as a nightlight. The farm pony beat her to the front hooves against the desk, and her rocked back and forth violently. Applejack! Fluttershy asked in daze. She gingerly ran her hoof through the heavy-heaving chest as she searched for the telltale signs of a serious injury. Her eyes swiveled with Applejack's direction at the sound of the desk beating against the wall. She was confused at first, but when the realization took hold, she shouted out of concern, Applejack! Applejack's brow was as moist as her cheeks. She then screamed through her gritted teeth as she continued to slam against the desk, throwing more of the weight into every thrust. Finally, the frame bowed and gave pressure splintered. The resisting contents scattered around the floor in the crash that ever berated around the cottage. Look out! Fluttershy launched herself into the air to keep bulk with the debris colliding into Applejack's. Applejack's eyes were more fixed on the lantern, which Fluttershy had thankfully forgot to snag it before it could shatter. Her hoof snapped out of the shard remains and clutched the biggest, sharpest pieces she could reach. She rolled onto her back as soon as she held the shard up in Fluttershy's direction. Her chest heaved. So you don't want me to die that way, huh? You ever rather die the dirty work yourself? Applejack's reply was haggard and more accompanied by more fearful coughs. Oh, Applejack, I told you I don't want you to suffer. A fallen desk would only bring you pain, not death. Fluttershy pleaded with a twisted way, justify her own logic. She slowly moved towards Applejack, hooves outstretched, like she was going to carry her to the bed, the way a loving mother does to her foal after a nightmare. Don't come any closer! Applejack held the shard in her shaking hooves. The pins and needles and the sensation in her hind hooves had been slowly receding, but she needed more time to play it up for Fluttershy. AJ emphasizes the tremor in her front hooves. She wanted to believe that there was enough sedative in Applejack's system to even make the simple tasks difficult. To really sell it at home, Applejack flopped onto the ground, sent the shard skittering across the floor, and she even managed to choke out a sob. Oh, come on, Applejack, come here, Fluttershy exclaimed as she swallowed her close with her hooves and wings, pressing her snout into Applejack's mane, rocking her back and forth. Applejack felt a tear from Fluttershy, and a bitter irony boiled in her blood. It'll be all over soon. No more suffering, I promise. Applejack didn't respond. Her eyes were fixated and away from the Pegasus as her limp limbs were awkwardly tossed over Fluttershy's back. She felt an initiate sense of pleasure hearing the Pegasus struggle from her weight. Slow and careful hoof steps took Applejack further from down the door back to the prison that was Fluttershy's bed. Fluttershy attempted to be gentle, but found the awkwardness of Applejack's body too cumbersome. For the third time, Applejack landed on the mattress springs, awaited for her demise. Fluttershy let out a sigh of relief after having unloaded her friend, and it was the point the tables officially turned. Applejack wasn't so sure how much of her body she had control of, so she let out a panicked outcry in anticipation of pain when she leapt from the bed. To her relief, her legs connected to the ground with the minimal discomfort. AJ spun around on hooves to buck Fluttershy in her direction, but the Pegasus dodged, leaping into the air in horror and surprise. Learning from her first attempt, AJ's next move was to destroy the sedatives. She raced for the medical case before Fluttershy could even follow the train of thought to react. Handle clenched into the Earth Pony's teeth, she rocketed out of the room while cases flopped open. One by one, the accursed needles were pried from the pouches, slammed onto the wooden floor in front of AJ. She trampled on them for good measures as she ran, the shards biting into her hooves, and the numbness started to take hold. Applejack! Applejack, stop! You're going to make it worse! Fluttershy called after her, pausing her in her pursuit to try and salvage the destroyed remains of her sedatives. Applejack's hooves were head on fire as the strange cocktail pans roar in forefront of her mind. At the worst possible moment, her illness reared its ugly head from the fit of coughs. The last syringe was destroyed amidst of the coughing and scream of agony, but Applejack's delight, blurred outline of salvation. The back door was finally within reach, and with her haste she stopped her sprint too late, and her body slammed harshly onto the door. Applejack hollered one final plea as she tried to right herself. I won't say a word, I promise. AJ braced for the Evermare's touch, knowing the collusion would give Fluttershy a chance to catch up. However, moments turned into seconds, and Applejack realized she couldn't hear the Pegasus in pursuit. She spun her head around in confusion, but didn't waste what precious seconds she had to find out where she had gone. Though through the unmanageable pain and shaking, she fumbled with the lock until a glorious click was heard. She was finally free. A soft grunt from behind Applejack stole moments of joy from the farm pony from when they were followed by a sudden sharp of pain that sheared through the center of her back. The pounding in her heart and her ears masked Fluttershy's approach in those final moments, but it did not encumber the pain. Astonished, Applejack turned to see what had happened, but was only able to make out the knife's outline protruding from her shadow. AJ's mind went blank. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words never came. Her only reality was slowing beats of her heart, echoing ever dimly in the encroaching darkness. AJ collapsed at Fluttershy's hooves, while the murderer sobbed bitterly over her victim. I'm so sorry. You weren't supposed to suffer. I'm so sorry. So sorry. It will be over soon. I promise the pain will stop. Fluttershy wept, soothing her hair from her friend's face. All Applejack could do was look up at her with a heartbreaking expression and confusion, agony and betrayal. Fluttershy pulled AJ into a hug, her tears mixed in with the thin line of blood escaping Applejack's lips. She cradled her there and mourned for her loss of her friend, until she could no longer hear her friend's ragged breaths or feel her hooves tremor. There was a silence that lingered in the little cottage on the hilltop, but only for a moment. It was broken when Fluttershy gingerly laid the body on the floor, then hastily, methodically, grabbed a mop. The next day's sun bore down unmercilessly over Sweet Apple Acres. The soft-spoken Pegasus lightly trotted up the pathway towards the farmhouse. She noted the absence of the apple family in the orchard, clutched firmly under her wing as she rather banged up the white medical case with the newly placed contents. She reached for the door and gently knocked against the aging wood. After a moment of no response, she knocked again a little more firmly. Come in! Fluttershy recognized Granny Smith's voice as she smiled. She then pushed open the door to find Applejack's Granny resting in her rocking chair. Fluttershy's attention went immediately to Granny's brow, where speckles of sweat had formed, then only the obvious tremor in her hooves. Oh, Fluttershy, you haven't seen Applejack, have you? She's terribly sick and she's ran off. Big Mac and Apple Bloom are out looking for her. You don't mind helping out, do you? Actually, I came to check on you. I heard about her condition and I know it can be contagious before getting a proper shot. It looks like you're sweating already. Fluttershy gingerly wiped Granny's brow. No, it's just heat and worry, Granny retorted. I don't know what I'll do if she doesn't get home soon. I can't manage any more pain. I know. That is why I'm here, to make the pain stop, Granny Smith. I promise.